Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really into the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where you will find stuff probably unavailable anywhere else. We're an established group with a large membership, and best of all, we're friendly. The link is in the YouTube description section.
In 1963, a set of photographs recorded some most unusual friendships. They featured the most popular peer of the day and the man who would become Britain's most notorious gangster. There was a third man, also a gangster, and the lover of a senior Labour MP. And a fourth man, a cat burglar and lover of the peer. The strange liaisons captured in the photographs straddled high life and low life, exclusive society and the underworld. Rumours about these connections reached Fleet Street, and in the summer of 1964, a Sunday newspaper ran a sensational story. The stage seemed set for scandal. But the political establishment rallied round the peer. With the help of some influential friends, he denied the story and the newspaper was forced to withdraw. The peer collected a huge sum in damages. The gangster embarked on 4 years of criminal mayhem. Tonight, Secret History tells the remarkable story of the scandal which got away, and of the love that in 1964 dared not speak its name. The peer in the photographs was Robert Boothby, one of Britain's most brilliant public figures this century. In 1924, when he was just 24, Bob Boothby was elected to Parliament. He was the up-and-coming Conservative MP of his day.
As a young parliamentarian, Bob Boothby had it at his feet. Attractive, good speaker, naturally talented. And at that point, it looked as though nothing really was beyond his grasp.
Boothby rose quickly. In 1926, he became Parliamentary Private Secretary to Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Many people thought he was destined to be Prime Minister. He was very good on economics. He was a Keynesian. He followed Keynes, and he seemed to be destined for higher things. But he did have one or two flaws.
One of Boothby's flaws was an overwhelming desire to embroider the facts.
Bob found it very, very difficult to tell the truth, and very often with them, it wasn't just because he wanted to hide some inconvenient fact. And there were all sorts of, types of lie, which, one's named for years and just accept, and some were rather endearing.
He had a great gift of exaggeration. He went to see Hitler in Germany and got an audience, whatever they called it, with Hitler. And he told the story that when he went into Hitler's presence.
As I got up to him, I was pretty frightened, because I knew he's a fairly formidable character. He rose to his feet, clicked his feet together and said, "Hitler!" And I, for once, rose to the occasion, and I clicked my feet, and I put my hand up and said, "Boothby!"
It's quite untrue. Not a word of truth in it.
Despite the tall story, Boothby saw through Hitler earlier than most, and was an outspoken critic of appeasement. But his political far-sightedness was dimmed by recklessness. He was an habitué of the casinos and constantly ran short of funds. A problem over money would lead to political disaster. After the Nazis invaded Czechoslovakia, Boothby agreed to help some Czech émigrés get their assets out of the country. He campaigned on their behalf in Parliament, but failed to declare that he was to be paid a commission on any assets which were recovered. In 1941, a parliamentary committee headed by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir John Simon, found Boothby guilty of misconduct.
I remember asking him at Oxford, I said, what did happen? And he said, I fibbed to Sir John Simon. When asked, do you have an interest in the Czech assets? Well, why did you fib? Oh, I couldn't stand Sir John Simon.
Churchill had appointed Boothby to his wartime government as Minister of Food, but now insisted he resign. Boothby never forgave Churchill.
What I did say at the time when I made a speech in the House of Commons is that I admitted no guilt of any kind, except the guilt of being a gambler, which I am by nature. And I've stuck to that ever since, and of course that's what saved me, because I couldn't have survived if I'd been guilty of anything beyond that.
Sir Robert Boothby and Mr. Rafe Assheton take a trip along the Parao River during their tour of Malaya.
But though he remained an MP, Boothby never held office again. Instead, after the war, he became the political megastar of the new age of television.
Very few of the Tory party were articulate or understood television. So in the world of the blind, a cock-eyed man was king, and Bob was his wonderfully wavy hair, which he used to sweep back in a rather dramatic way, and his fluent tongue. He enjoyed a new life.
In the news, a fortnightly discussion.
Boothby's leading role in the first TV talk shows made him one of the most famous men in the country, always armed with the provocative remark.
There is nothing more boring than a news bulletin on the BBC unless there happens to be a world war raging at the time.
His star status aroused envy.
I used to hear conservative MPs say about him, he's a bit of a cad, you know, he's a bit of a bounder. I once said to him myself, I said, I know, Bob, you are a bit of a shit. And he said, well, a bit of one, but not entirely.
Those in the know had another reason to disapprove of Boothby. Along with his lying and gambling, he was marred by a third flaw, an uncontrollable urge for wide-ranging sexual adventure.
When Bob had been at Magdalen, he was nicknamed the Palladium because he was twice nightly. And I remember repeating this to Bob, and he said, I assumed rather naively this meant girls. He said, oh no, girls never were in Oxford. They were strange creatures who sort of took over the place for command balls.
He was bisexual. I mean, this I know, the family knew this. I mean, he told me on many occasions, he said, I'm not sure. He told me on many occasions that he was. I'm not sure if I like the boys better than the girls or the girls better than the boys, he used to say.
Certainly he was a purely homosexualized person until he was about sort of 25 or something. And he then, I think, took quite a long time to actually start having affairs with women. He told me this, and he said, you know, I've never been to bed with anybody, a woman, except a prostitute or a married woman.
Boothby's most enduring heterosexual affair, which lasted over 3 decades, was with Lady Dorothy Macmillan, the wife of his Conservative colleague Harold Macmillan.
Lady Dorothy always surprised me as being his great love of his life, because he was a very dapper man. He dressed always very neatly, and he had tiny little feet, and always very neat shoes. And he was presentable. And Lady Dorothy was perfectly presentable, but she was rather horse-like, if you know what I mean, and she had huge hands like hams, and a little bit of a, you know, here. And I once said to him how surprised I was that it was her. And he admitted it, he said, well, that's the way it is, I just happen to love her.
In an effort to achieve respectability, Boothby decided in 1935 to marry. The woman he chose was Dorothy Macmillan's cousin, Diana Cavendish. But from day one of the honeymoon, it went horribly wrong.
He felt trapped with this sort of woman there for life, and when they got to Rome, they had a fairly uncomfortable sort of night, and Bob, without much sleep, came down early for breakfast. She didn't appear. He went up the stairs and found Diana coming down. I've got joyous news for you, she said. Bob's heart absolutely sacked. My God, is she pregnant? it's all right, I've got the curse, so you needn't fuck me anymore. Physically, I think he was rather frightened of women. Emotionally, I think that men did matter very much more to him. And some sort of younger man who he could sort of, establish a close relationship was very, very important.
Boothby's marriage was dissolved after just 2 years. His affair with Dorothy Macmillan and affairs with other women continued. But as he grew older, Boothby's search for relationships with younger men quickened. One was with George Carruth, whom Boothby first met on a holiday in the Caribbean. Carruth came to London in the late 1950s as a dancer, and then, on Boothby's advice, trained as a chef.
He always taught me the best. Took me to the best restaurants. You got to see, young man, what good food is all about if you're going to make your mark. So that's how we communicated with through the time. I mean, we were inseparable. I mean, anything that I wanted to know, I was in doubt, he was there. I probably was like the son he never had, and I wanted advice, and he was there.
Carruth's father had asked Boothby to watch over his son. But that didn't stop Boothby on one occasion, after a particularly good dinner, making a pass.
We ate so much food, and he really stank of garlic, and no doubt he was jolly and tried to give me a kiss on the cheek. And I says, get off of it. I says, you stunk of garlic. And he said, George Carruth, you are the biggest little shit I have ever known. And I said, well, that's all right, but no garlic and get off of it,
But why was he upset with you?
Because I just wouldn't allow him to come closer to me.
But another young man was more accommodating. Boothby's true relationship with him, which has remained secret till now, would have momentous consequences. Leslie Holt came from a very different background to Robert Boothby. One of 9 children, he spent his childhood in the wartime slums of London's East End. He was often in trouble with the police, and family legend recalls how the young animal-loving Robin Hood was finally sent away from home.
He was about 8 or 9, I can remember, when he loved animals. He brought home a dog, a great big dog, and my mum had 8 boys and me, we never had nothing. And she said, oh, get this dog out, Leslie, because I can't afford to keep you, let alone him. And he started moaning anyway. He took the dog out, and he thought the dog was hungry, and he nicked a tin of biscuits to give the dog a biscuit, because he was hungry, with another boy. Anyway, the other little boy got caught with the police, and he told on my brother. Anyway, they went to court, and he got put in an approved school over that.
Until 14, Leslie spent most of his life in approved school. Then, like many other young men from the East End, he found the first route to a better life: boxing. It was at a boxing match that Boothby first met Leslie Holt.
He was a very cheeky sort of person. And had someone told Leslie, oh look, there's Lord Boothby, he would have gone right over and introduced himself. He would have made himself known.
For a man like Boothby, always in search of adventure, Leslie Holt was a dashing figure. From boxing, Holt moved on to earn his living as a skillful and successful cat burglar.
He would have a nice car, a couple of big dogs, Dobermans in the back. He was a very glamorous person. He was larger than life, he really was. He mixed with famous people. He was always sort of saying, one of his favourite sayings was, oh, you peasants, you've seen nothing of life.
Holt became a frequent visitor to Boothby's flat in Eaton Square.
I suppose Lord Boothby was into Leslie because of the completely different life that Leslie lived with all the villains. And I think Boothby was probably fascinated by all that.
Boothby had much to give Leslie in return.
He showed him a completely different world. He turned him on to things he never thought about, like opera, classical music, the arts, museums. A life he would never have experienced if it hadn't have been for Lord Boothby.
Leslie was born poor, but should have been born rich. Leslie should have been a lord.
You get film stars, actors, models, hookers, lesbians, homosexuals, straight people who like to be on the gay scene. That was all the kind of thing that was going on all through the 60s.
Holt himself was bisexual. This was the overriding attraction for Boothby.
Leslie and Lord Boothby were having a sexual relationship, a homosexual relationship. I think he really loved him. And from Leslie, I know Boothby really loved Leslie.
By Christmas 1963, the friendship had grown so close that Boothby even wrote to Leslie Holt's parents to express his regard for their son.
Well, this is a letter from Lord Boothby to my parents, and he states that I would do my best to keep Leslie on the straight path, you know, and he's very fond of him as he has no son of his own, and he thinks that my brother will make good in quite a big way. You know, my parents were quite pleased.
But Boothby's relationship with Holt was leading him into danger. For in early 1963, Holt introduced him to a man called Ronnie Kray. 1963 was a dangerous year for men in the public eye. The War Minister, John Profumo, had been forced to resign after lying to Parliament about his relationship with a prostitute, Christine Keeler. Until then, politicians' private lives had been largely immune from press inquiry. Even the most flamboyant character like Boothby, lover simultaneously of a Prime Minister's wife and a cat burglar, could joke about it.
If I really told the full story of my private life, I think I'd make £500,000, but I'd have to spend the rest of my life in Tahiti, and I don't particularly want to do that.
But Fleet Street and the new satirists of television were taking increasing liberties with the reputations of great men.
Now, sir, you're a government spokesman.
Oh, yes, darling.
I imagine you're downcast.
No, I'm Perkins.
No, but you must be pretty upset.
Pretty, yes. Upset, no.
That was the year that was. Time for Tories to take stock.
We had two sorts of fever. We had Fleet Street fever, which believed that, in a sense, if one mouse had gone down the hole, other mice would go down the hole. So they were full of ideas about possible scandal in the government. And then we had, in a sense, ministerial fever, which was the belief that everybody was vulnerable. And so we had a high state of excitement.
The next year, the Tories were hit by another scandal which threatened to rival Profumo. On the 12th of July 1964, the Sunday Mirror printed a story about a homosexual relationship between a prominent Conservative peer and a leading London thug. Though the Mirror didn't name them, the peer was Lord Boothby, the thug, Ronnie Kray. The next day, some photographs showing the two men together were delivered to the Mirror.
The pictures landed on my desk and we were delighted. This was it. Bang, we've got him. Normally you would have said, well, there's nothing particularly incriminating in these pictures, except that you're looking at a notorious criminal, a well-known homosexual, a very dangerous, sordid kind of character, and next to him, a peer of the realm, pillar of the Conservative Party, Churchill's associate, Lord Boothby. A public darling, of course. He'd been the uncle of the nation through television. Everybody loved Boothby. But he really looked a fish out of water sitting there next to Ronnie Kray, that's for sure. And we thought everybody would draw the right conclusions.
But only 4 weeks later, the Mirror retracted its story and never published the photographs. The full set of photographs, seen now for the first time, are the key to understanding why the entire political establishment wanted the peer and the gangster story covered up. By 1963, Bob Boothby was freer than ever to enjoy life. He'd been made a peer by Harold Macmillan, the husband of his lover. He was rector of St Andrews University, a star of television, judge at beauty contests, a national celebrity and doyen of society, both high and low. In February 1963, Boothby's lover, the cat burglar Leslie Holt, introduced him to his good friend, Ronnie Kray. Kray was seeking investors for a business deal in Africa. Boothby had turned down the idea, but they got on well. Kray hired a photographer to record the occasion, and after the meeting, sent Boothby a small gift. Boothby wrote, "Dear Mr. Kray, I cannot thank you enough for the lovely piece of china." Over the next 3 years, their friendship blossomed, although sometimes it could produce a little social awkwardness. Once Ronnie Kray called round at Boothby's flat in Eaton Square. The door was answered by a young woman.
She opened the door, the front door, and there was this sinister-looking man, quite unlike Bob's normal friends, who said, "Oh, I'm just passing in. Is Bob in?" This was Ronnie Kray. And she was really rather frightened and thought, who is this man who seemed to her rather like a sort of gangster, and shut the door rather rudely in his face. Well, rather charmingly, later that day, there arrived sort of dozens and dozens of red roses as a way of apologising for frightening the girl. But it was quite obvious on this occasion that, he was in the habit of just calling round and really knew Bob very well.
With his famous friends, Ronnie Kray was at pains to behave like the perfect gentleman. But since the introduction had been made by his criminal lover, Boothby must have known there was another side to the Krays. Like Leslie Holt, the Kray twins had first made their names as teenage boxers. Reggie was skillful. Ronnie was the brawler. They may have loved their mum, but by their early 20s, their career was crime. They dominated the East End, their manor, as they like to call it, specialising in extortion by violence. In the late 50s, Ronnie Kray served a 3-year prison term for grievous bodily harm. By the time Kray was introduced to Boothby, the twins had moved into the West End too, and were London's top gangsters, running protection rackets and muscling in on a string of clubs.
Any of those places they run had this air of menace, this feeling that violence could erupt at any moment, and violence on a very ruthless scale. They quite like the cut and thrust of close combat. They just loved that stabbing and smashing and punching and kicking. That was their go. Ronnie Kray was, of course, the sort of dominant twin, and he was also mad.
Ronnie was definitely crazy, He was subject to mood, quick turns of mood. Now, one night, there was a guy in the Kentucky said to him, "Ron, I think you better go to the country because you're putting on a bit of weight." So he said, "Yeah, come, I want to talk to you. Go in the toilet." And he cut him so badly, give him 76 stitches. We called the guy Tramlines after that, And it was just for saying that, But had he been in a good mood, he would have said, "Yeah, you're probably right," and laughed it off.
In addition to his bouts of madness and violence, Ronnie Kray was a self-proclaimed homosexual, something of a novelty on the macho London crime scene.
He never tried to hide that, he was raving puff, simple as that. And get guys bringing boys into him, prospects they called them, bring them into him, either to curry favour or to sort of ease the way in the door. But he'd phone him first and say, "I've got a lovely boy for you."
They weren't homosexuals. They were heterosexual boys, but younger, maybe in their sort of late teens. The classic modus operandi for seduction would be to take a young lad who they'd sort of got to know up to the West End to a gambling club where he would lay the bets for them, and obviously be highly flattered and all the attention they were getting. He was in the sort of company of a star. And then late at night, when they'd say, "Let's go to a hotel," and they'd go to one of these hotels really quite local, and there would only be a double bed. That would be the classic scenario.
These were young guys, young fighters, a lot of them,
I couldn't believe it, you know, the way these young guys used to just go with him.
Ronnie Kray's fondness for young men gave him something to share with his new friend, Lord Boothby. John Pearson, then a young journalist, gained a unique insight into the Krays after he was invited by them in their 60s heyday to write their biography.
As soon as I started talking to any of the people round the Krays, they'd all say the same. They'd say, of course, you see, Bob Boothby, he was a friend of Ronnie's. Ronnie used to get him boys. He was always down at East End. We used to call Bob the Queen Mother.
At their first meeting, Ronnie Kray had told Boothby he owned a gaming club called Esmeralda's Barn. For Boothby, it was just the ticket. He wrote to Kray, "I shall be looking in at Esmeralda's, which is just round the corner from here." At Esmeralda's, Kray introduced Boothby to an attractive 17-year-old young man, the brother of one of Kray's own boyfriends.
Boothby took to this boy, who for a time actually lived in Boothby's flat, and finally, being a criminal, forged a cheque of Boothby's for 1,800 quid and took it into the nearest branch of Barclays Bank, where he was promptly caught. Well, now, this was a potentially extremely dangerous thing for Boothby, obviously. You know, good-looking young boy stealing a cheque. What was he doing in Lord Boothby's flat? How was he able to know where the money came from? How was he able to forge his signature? All these questions would come up in court.
But Boothby was protected from publicity. On Kray's instructions, the boy pleaded guilty at trial, said nothing, and went to prison.
While he was in prison, Boothby on 3 occasions tried to get in to see this boy. On 3 occasions, Ronnie Kray stopped him going in, saying, "Don't be a silly old fool."
Boothby was playing a risky double game. In June 1964, the star of television received television's most popular accolade. His respectable friends flocked to acclaim him. Ronnie Kray was not invited onto the programme, nor for that matter were Leslie Holt or Lady Dorothy Macmillan. At the very time he was being feted on This Is Your Life, Boothby's friendship with Kray was attracting the attention of Scotland Yard's intelligence section, C11. They believed that the Boothby-Kray relationship itself was homosexual, still a criminal offence, but without the evidence to press any charges, leaked the story to the Sunday Mirror's crime correspondent, Norman Lucas.
I was told that there was no doubt that this relationship existed, but they had no means of proving it.
The Mirror's editor, Reg Payne, decided, after taking legal advice, to run the story, but not name Boothby or Kray. He phoned the Mirror's chairman, Cecil King, with news of the exciting scoop.
Reg came back absolutely beaming. He said, "Old Cecil's got a dinner party on." He said, "He's delighted." He said, "This is going to give him a bomb to drop upon his dinner guests."
King was very ambitious to get on the right side of Harold Wilson. This was in 1964, shortly before Wilson was going to win the election. And I think he saw this as a wonderful opportunity, something he could actually give the Labour Party. Another Profumo scandal, another, a really big case on a big celebrity, which would do the Tory party damage at the election.
The story sent shockwaves through the government. Cabinet papers released 30 years later record a series of top-level meetings held by the Home Secretary, Henry Brooke, at the House of Commons. Brooke told his colleagues that Cecil King was reported as saying the Sunday Mirror's story was the beginning of a scandal which would wreck the Tory party. But King's plan was about to misfire. It was not the government which had most to lose from the peer and the gangster story, but the Labour Party King was so desperately trying to help. What has never been revealed, and what the Mirror never realised, is that some of the photographs showed a fourth man, Teddy Smith, or Mad Teddy as he was known.
Teddy Smith was very close to the twins. He was part of their senior management team that met every day in Valence Road and conducted their business meetings, and he was very in with them, there's no question about that.
He was quiet, man. He was a quite intelligent guy. He could speak a few languages. He was quite well read, and he could hold very deep conversations, but he was a man that used to go into violent fits. He wanted to be hitting people on the chin for unknown reasons.
Teddy Smith was also homosexual. He had one relationship the Labour leadership had every interest in keeping quiet.
I used to see Teddy Smith with Dryburgh, Tom Dryburgh, and it was a well-known fact in the circle that what I used to mix with, he was having an affair with Dryburgh.
Tom Dryburgh was a senior Labour MP, member of the National Executive, former chairman of the party, and a voracious homosexual. If Dryburgh's relationship with the Krays' right-hand man had got out, the Labour Party would have been embroiled in its own sensational scandal.
Dryburgh, because of his sexual activities, could be preyed upon, and so he was always seen to be a person that would do the Krays some kind of favour through the efforts of Smith.
Dryburgh had several criminal lovers, for whom he did some extraordinary favours. One was a partner in crime and friend of 1960s robber Norman Parker.
My friend got Dryburgh to tell him about an antique dealer friend of Dryburgh's with a view to us going and robbing him. And that is in fact what we did. I mean, Dryburgh told us where he lived, what time he'd be in, we could catch him in, what sort of antiques that were there. We went along on the evening in question, we forced our way in, we tied the chap up, we robbed the place for about £20,000 worth of antiques and came away with them.
Would Dryburgh have expected to see any of that money?
According to my friend, he did expect to see some of the money, and according to my friend, he was given some of the money.
The Labour leadership was well aware of Dryburgh's predilections, but over many decades protected him. Dryburgh was the reason Harold Wilson knew that scandal could cut both ways. The reason stories like the peer and the gangster needed, for the good of the whole body politic, to be suppressed. When the story had first broken, Boothby was on holiday in France. As soon as he read it in the Mirror's foreign edition, he phoned Tom Dryburgh.
Boothby knew perfectly well Dryburgh was the great friend of the Krays. And if anyone would know what was going on in the underworld of London, it was that incredible louche character, Tom Dryburgh.
As Boothby returned to London, the Westminster rumour machine was linking Dryburgh to the scandal. Cabinet papers showed that 2 Tory MPs reported that Boothby and Dryburgh had been seen together importuning young men at dog racing tracks. With Dryburgh's name being dragged in, the top legal guns of the Labour Party were wheeled out to help Boothby. Boothby was put in touch with Arnold Goodman, Harold Wilson's solicitor and confidant. Goodman brought in Gerald Gardner, Labour's future Lord Chancellor. Gardner advised Boothby not to go to court. Instead, in a letter to the Times, drafted by Goodman, Boothby boldly declared that he was the peer the Mirror was targeting, but that the story was a tissue of atrocious lies. He denied he was a homosexual and stated that he had met Ronnie Kray on only 3 occasions at his flat to discuss a business proposition.
He'd been accused of being homosexual, and he wrote that letter to the Times to say that he wasn't and never had been, which was quite untrue, because homosexuality at that time was illegal. And if it had come about that it really had, and it could be proved, he'd committed a criminal offence. He was getting out of a hole. And if he could get out of a hole by lying, he'd get out of a hole by lying.
Boothby's lies also got Tom Dryburgh and the Labour Party out of any possible hole. In the face of Boothby's counter-attack, planned by influential figures so close to Labour's leader, the Mirror caved in. Cecil King agreed to pay Boothby £40,000, equivalent to £500,000 today.
Cecil King took the decision to settle out of court. He wouldn't fight it. Every single last person on the Mirror, except Cecil King, wanted to fight that case. We had the story, we had the pictures, we had the evidence, we had everything. But Cecil King wouldn't do it, and the whole building, why? Why are we not fighting it? Why are we not going to court?
The great and the good engineered the niftiest, swiftest cover-up, which netted Lord Boothby £40,000. An official apology grovellingly printed on the front of the Sunday Mirror for something which was pretty well the truth.
4 years later, Boothby himself gave John Pearson an extraordinary explanation of who had really been pulling the strings of the rescue operation.
I said, but there's one thing that did puzzle me about all this, Lord Boothby. Why was it that when the trouble started, the people who supported you weren't from your own party, the Conservatives, they were from the Labour Party? Ah, he said there, now you've hit a very interesting point, Mr. Pearson, very interesting. He said, it's all down to the little man. So I said, who's the little man? Oh, he said, don't you know the little man? Harold Wilson. You see, he said, Harold had always been a great admirer of mine. And he said that was the real reason. He said it was Harold Wilson didn't want this slur over me. And he was the one who was responsible for getting Goodman to do the business and make the deal with the Sunday Mirror.
The peer had won a famous victory. It would have disastrous consequences for the police attempt to nail the gangster. By lying over his friendship with Ronnie Kray, Boothby had gambled and won. But it was a gamble too far, for the cover-up which protected him would protect the Krays too. The first victims of the cover-up were the policemen investigating the Krays. After the Mirror story was published, the Metropolitan Police Chief, Sir Joseph Simpson, furious at the leak, issued a statement denying it. It was a devastating blow to his officers. The Kray investigation carried on, but with no support from the top.
I was called to the yard to see the then commander of the CID, Commander Millen, and he was very disparaging about the success of the squad, said that he thought without any question that it should be wound down.
Up against time pressure, Reed's team arrested the Krays and Teddy Smith on protection racket charges after Smith had smashed up a West End club the Krays were trying to muscle in on. Boothby campaigned for his friends in the House of Lords, demanding to know how long they'd be detained before the trial. His fellow peers were appalled at Boothby's intervention. So too were the police.
I didn't need that at the time. What I needed was less publicity of that kind and a more positive publicity about the fact that these were two utter villains and that we wanted to get them convicted instead of a lord that had been a very, very popular man, of course, and bearing that in mind and the sway that he might have with people in various quarters. It was wrong, in my view, that he should stand up and show himself to be a friend of, or at least have some relation with, two villains like that.
The Krays and Teddy Smith were acquitted. As they walked free from the Old Bailey, Boothby penned a letter of congratulation to Ronnie. "To some extent I share in your triumph," he wrote. The twins were all sweetness.
How much has this trial cost you?
It's cost us roughly £8,000.
And how do you feel about that?
I don't suppose anyone likes the idea of spending that money for no reason at all, you know.
Does it leave you broke, or how does it leave you?
It doesn't leave us broke, but at the same time it's a lot of money to have to pay out when one is innocent, you know.
What are you going to do now that it's all over?
Well, I'd like to go abroad for a short while, and then I'd like to be left alone.
Well, of course, they went back to the East End like heroes. I mean, people were lining the streets, they were decorated, there were street parties, that kind of thing. It was an incredible situation. And what they were saying to their followers and to the public, well, this is us. We told you that we could walk on water. We told you that the police were impotent to prosecute us. We told you that we'd got good, powerful, influential friends like Boothby and like Dryburgh, and that they would support us. For
the next 3 years, the Krays were free to act as they liked. They ran their protection rackets unchallenged and ended up committing cold-blooded murder in full public view.
They went off like rockets then, and they enjoyed a period of time when they were totally invincible. They murdered Jack the Hat McVitie, they murdered Cornell, and nothing was being done about it all the time.
The police wouldn't go for them. The politicians wouldn't go for them. The press wouldn't go for them. Nobody would.
I think we laid off the Krays after that, if I remember rightly. In other words, they were able to get away with a lot of things that would have otherwise been big stories in the newspapers. The feeling was, oh, Krays, Boothby, leave it alone, have nothing to do with it. Dodgy, dangerous, £40,000, no thank you.
Boothby's friendship with Ronnie Kray grew ever closer. On New Year's Eve, 1965, Boothby wrote to thank him for all the Christmas cards from your family and also the lovely Corona cigars. All good wishes for 1966. Yours ever, Bob B. And, as always, there were the young men.
I was in a nightclub called the El Morocco in Gerrard Street, and the twins were in there, accompanied by Boothby, wearing one of his ridiculous bow ties. And they had a couple of young boys with them on the table, sitting at the table, and after a while Boothby got up to leave. One of the boys went with him, and they went out the door into the street, and about 2 minutes later I heard Boothby's voice, Ronnie, come out here a minute. He had a very nice voice, did Mr. Boothby. And Ronnie's got up and got out, and Billy Gentry, the manager, went with him, and apparently the young boy who'd gone out with Lord Boothby didn't want to go home with him. And Ronnie said to him, you will go home with Mr. Boothby, you will do anything Mr. Boothby wants, or I will hurt you badly. So of course the kid went home with Mr. Boothby, didn't he?
There were orgies too. Ronnie Kray had a flat in Cedar Court in East London, adorned with Eastern tapestries and a 3-foot-high ebony elephant with ivory tusks. There was a giant 4-poster bed surrounded by mirrors. The full details of the Cedar Court orgies have remained hidden till now. But this unpublished manuscript, written by Ronnie Hart, a cousin of the Krays who later gave evidence against them, gives for the first time an insider's account. Hart wrote, Lord Boothby was among the people who attended, and on one occasion Ronnie swapped boys with him. Kray expected favours from Boothby in return. In one bizarre incident, Boothby's cousin Peter Carey was phoned by a friend of Boothby's to ask if he could help Ronnie Kray.
This is my father, who is a very conventional naval officer, retired naval officer then. Why? Who wants to speak to him? Ronnie Kray wants to speak to him. Why? Well, he's got a new project for either gun running or drug running in the Mediterranean. And Peter, of course, was captain of coastal forces, so he must know all about MTBs. He wondered whether Peter would like to help him. Well, my father was not remotely amused by this.
But the dangerous liaisons between high life and low life would not last much longer. As the Krays sank into the increasing violence which would end in murder, Boothby began to distance himself. He told his lover, Leslie Holt, that if he didn't stop burgling, it would be the end of their friendship.
He wanted him to give it up. He really did want him to give it up. He said he had no need for it, but he wouldn't. He just enjoyed it.
And now that introduction which Holt had made backfired on him.
I think Leslie sort of knew he'd blown it with Lord Boothby, really, and I think he deeply regretted that. He sort of hinted.
For Lord Boothby and 1,000 well-wishers outside Caxton Hall, it was the wedding of the year. The day he married...
In 1967, Boothby, still a household name, married for a second time. His bride, a beautiful Sardinian, Wanda Senna. To his friends in the Underworld, it was a clear message. He wanted out.
Wanda seems to have tamed the Boothby temperament. Before the honeymoon in Scotland, she said, he's a very good boy now.
The unlikely friendships which had once seemed so promising were disintegrating. But the story wasn't over. There would be very different outcomes to the lives of the men in the photographs. A few years later, Leslie Holt met a Harley Street doctor called Gordon Kells, for whom his friend Ricky Greeley was then working as a secretary. Kells soon took to Holt.
He fancied Leslie. I mean, he told me he fancied Leslie. I mean, every time Leslie used to come to the surgery, he'd say, "Don't forget to get your black stockings, I've got mine ready, and I've got my leather skirt." All that kind of banter went on between them.
But there was another side to their relationship.
The doctor was procuring clients for Leslie to steal from. And Leslie would rob them, and the doctor and him would share the proceeds. It was a very sort of lucrative setup they had.
But in 1979, something began to go wrong with Kells and Holt's setup.
Kells kept phoning me up nearly every day. "Is Leslie in town? Is Leslie in town?" I said, "No." Anyway, when he phoned up one day, he said, "Is Leslie about?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Tell him not to come round. The place is surrounded with police."
At this time, Leslie Holt was being troubled by a verruca on his foot. Kells operated to remove it. He gave Holt a massive overdose of anaesthetic. Holt was rushed into hospital.
At the hospital, in the waiting room, this doctor came into the room and he said, "I'm very sorry, your brother died. Pneumonia went across him and it couldn't save him." And he said, "Would you like to stay here because you've been all on your own?" I said, "No, I've got to go home to my dad and tell him what's happened."
Kells was tried for unlawful killing, but despite the overwhelming medical evidence, was acquitted. No evidence about his real relationship with Holt and any possible motive for wanting rid of him was put before the jury.
The jury knew nothing of their friendship or the criminal things that were going on between them, because the police stated that the doctor would go to prison on the medical evidence alone. And he walked a free man because of that.
Gordon Kells died early this year from a heart attack.
He meant to kill him, I'm sure of it.
I know he killed him. I don't think I know.
There was also, shortly before the Krays were arrested in 1968, an unresolved end to the known life of Mad Teddy Smith.
Suddenly, Teddy Smith disappeared. And the very sinister aspect about it all is that although at the end of the case I'd got some of the major movers in the Kray gang to come on my side to give Queen's evidence and so on, and they were very, very carefully listing every possible complaint they'd got against the Krays. None of them knew what had happened to Teddy Smith.
Well, this rumours going round all over that they'd had a fallout over a boy, and Reg killed him, or Ronnie killed him, or one of the firm killed him. I find that very hard to believe.
Did you ever learn anything from the Krays about what had happened?
No, nothing. Never been mentioned. Not discussed. It's never discussed.
The law finally caught up with the Kray twins in 1969. They were each sent to prison for a minimum of 30 years for murder. Ronnie Kray was sanguine about his fate.
He was there in Durham jail, determined to do his bird well. And when I went to see him, he said, when it's all over and I come out of prison, he said, I'll take you off on a trip round the world and we'll have a couple of boys. I said, but Ronnie, I don't like boys. He said, oh, he said, by then you will. Boys is best.
Ronnie Kray died in Broadmoor 2 years ago. Bob Boothby retreated into respectable old age, a grand old man of the 20th century. Provocative to the end.
When he was well into his 80s, I used to go and see him in his flat, where he was living on whiskey and Complan, or so he said. And I remember one time, just before his death, I asked him how he was, and he said, from the age of 75, euthanasia ought to be voluntary, but at 85, it ought to be compulsory.
Bob Boothby was the great political entertainer. His exotic private life was his affair, but when it came to Ronnie Kray, Boothby's lies caused public harm. Without the secrecy over the men in the photographs, the Krays would have been hunted down earlier, and their victims might have lived to tell the tale.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly, moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I